The next panel is perhaps one of the most important because it focuses on an issue that has come up in every other session so far, and it's really all about how we, in doing the work that we do on climate and nature, we ensure that we're working with and alongside the most vulnerable and affected communities, but both in terms of climate change and in terms of the nature crisis. So I'm absolutely delighted that we've got Nikita Mistry from the COP26 Unit and Tasneem Essop from CAN International, who are brilliant speakers on this, and will really kind of get into some of the substance of what it might mean to put inclusion and diversity at the heart of our work in 2021. And I'm going to hand over to Megan Trethewey, who's head of programs at Conservative Environment Network, and who will guide us through the discussion over the next 45 minutes. So welcome to Meg, Nikita, and Tasneem. You can all reveal yourselves on video, and I'll hand over to Megan, and I will unvideo myself, but welcome everyone, and look forward to hearing the discussion.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this panel discussion on how can we ensure fairness and inclusion are at the heart of environmental action in 2021. As Chris was saying, this is one part of Green Alliance's day-long event on Making It Count, a year of UK leadership on climate and nature. So make sure you come back after this at 3:30 for the keynote address from the COP26 President, Alex Sharma. As Chris said, I'm Meg Trethewey. I'm the head of programs at CEN. We're the independent forum for conservatives who support conservation and decarbonisation, including a caucus of over 100 parliamentarians, a councillor network, and grassroots supporters. And so we're here today to talk about fairness and inclusion. And we know that the impacts of the climate crisis are not equal within and between countries, and they can compound pre-existing vulnerabilities. The 2021 Glasgow Climate Summit is an important opportunity to hear from the global community, and particularly those countries that are on the front line of climate change, and involve them in the discussions being made about their futures. So how can COP26 amplify minority voices and be a truly inclusive conference? That's what we're here to talk about today. And I'm really pleased to be joined by two expert speakers. We have Nikita Mistry, the head of civil society engagement at the COP26 Unit in the Cabinet Office, and Tasneem Essop, the executive director of Climate Action Network International, who's just completed her second term as the commissioner in the National Planning Commission in South Africa, appointed by the president, where she led the work on climate change and the just transition. So I'm just going to hand over to our speakers for some brief opening remarks before we start our discussion, starting with you, Nikita, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Megan. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and have the opportunity to talk about an issue that is incredibly important to me, alongside Tasneem, who is a true leader in this space. It is clear that existing inequalities compound the impacts of climate change, especially for those facing multiple exclusions based on their characteristics, including women, Indigenous peoples, people of colour, and others whose views are often marginalised. This can create overlapping systems of disadvantage. We need to ensure that all these voices are heard and represented, while acknowledging that some people experience multiple layers of marginalisation that we cannot be neutral to. And as policymakers, we shouldn't be afraid to talk about this and admit that we need to do more and do more. One of the things that I love most about my role is that I get the opportunity to work and learn from such a diversity of civil society groups, young people, and Indigenous peoples who are not just inspirational, but experts in their fields. They have continued challenge us to do more, to go further, to be ambitious, so that we can seize the opportunity to make COP26 a real success and make a real difference in the lives of people. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you and my fellow panelists on how we can work together to ensure that fairness and inclusion are at the heart of environmental action in 2021.
Thank you so much, Tasneem.
Thanks. Thank you, Meg. And hi, Nikita, and greetings to everybody. Of course, this is one of the most important topics, and I'm really honored that you invited me to talk about it as well. And so I think the important thing that we should recognize that if we want to be inclusive and fair, it is both in terms of process as well as outcome. And as you both rightly have indicated, you know, the outcome, of course, has to address the kind of the convergence of multiple crises that we're experiencing now, and of course, which COVID has very clearly made visible in terms of who are the most vulnerable in our societies, and you know, the kind of evidence that those who are living in poverty, those who are suffering inequality, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities are the most vulnerable. And so whatever outcome we have to address the climate crisis, as well as ensuring, of course, that you recognize that many of these crises are actually interconnected. And so we would have to, at the same time, through the way we deal with the climate crisis, also address social justice and racial justice as well. And so having that intersectional approach and ensuring that therefore the outcome would be fair and just is going to be important. And the only way it can be fair and just is if we actually had really deep and democratic and inclusive and transparent processes. And so I recognize that the title of this conference, this event, has been UK Leadership for Climate and Nature. And it's going to be really important to start at home, of course, and being the COP president for Glasgow next year, it's going to be important that the UK demonstrates its own ambition, its own domestic ambition, and the decisions it makes around that and the processes to make those decisions should be a countrywide, a society-wide process that includes, especially in a very deliberative way, those vulnerable communities, those who are on the forefront of these crises inside your country, and you have your own many challenges around it. And at the same time, it would be really important for the UK to also be looking at its international commitments. And this is where the very important issue of solidarity, of ensuring the obligations and commitments you have made in the Paris Agreement becomes really important. And so, you know, to start at home, looking at your own domestic action in an inclusive way, but also to look outward and look at what you need to do in terms of your actions to ensure fairness and equity. And I'd really like to talk much more about that. The second element that I would like to engage in this conversation, in maybe the next rounds, Meg, is the issue of the UNFCCC processes itself. And to be quite honest, you know, the processes and structures as it's currently set up, not conducive to inclusive and fair process. And I'll give you much more details about it, and also ideas for how we've been sharing this both with the Secretariat and with the COP presidency. You know, how we could actually make it a far more inclusive and fair process itself. So it's not fit for purpose, but I think that there is you know, we're not going to be able to reform and transform the UNFCCC and the wider multilateral systems immediately before Glasgow, but certainly I think it would be useful for us to explore potentially what a UK COP presidency could do to build inclusive and fair processes in Glasgow at COP26. So I'll leave it there. I know this was introductory remarks, and I hope we'll have time to get a bit deeper into each of these areas, and I look forward to the engagement.
Thanks so much, Tasneem. Yeah, I actually think we should dive straight in on that point that you mentioned, but just a reminder to everyone watching that we will also be taking Q&A. So please do send in your questions via the box at the bottom of your screen. I wonder if, Tasneem, I might sort of redirect your question to Nikita a little bit, because I'm also quite interested in how we can really engage the public in this discussion? Because I think, just like you were saying, the UNFCCC process, it feels complicated. I mean, I only started getting my head around it, you know, when we sort of started bidding to host it. It's such a complex thing. And I think we talk about it domestically as this great chance for change as well, and to really, you know, bring the public with us on this path to net zero. But I think it's hugely important that we try to figure out how we can engage people with it. And Nikita, I wonder if you might want to talk a little bit about what you've been working on and how we sort of demystify it and really bring in the public domestically, but also internationally, so it's not just about the high level negotiations that are going on.
Thank you. Some really important points raised there. I think it's quite a multifaceted approach. So I think one of the things that I was really keen to do when I started this role was just break out of the climate bubble that we're in. We know these issues, we care about them, but other people, like, they have bills to pay, they have challenges and that are different to ours, and we need to communicate with everyone. We need to take the time to do it. I think that me and my unit and my team are great at that. Like, there's real appetite and ambition to engage with civil society groups domestically that are maybe smaller or that haven't traditionally been engaged with us. And I think it's important. This has to feel like an all of society COP, and we have to. There is so much strength in diversity and the views and the experiences that people bring. So a lot of our work is focused on kind of reaching out to wider groups of people, trying to understand, like, what do they think, like, what do they care about. At the same time, working with organizations like CAN International, who just have, you guys have so much experience and so much knowledge and insight, and not even, and nothing can deny that. So I think we have to, and we've been trying to make sure that the experience and knowledge and insight is embedded into our planning and preparations for COP. And that includes trying to find a way to make the negotiations, which are a party-to-party process, as inclusive as possible, as well as engaging civil society, Indigenous peoples and young people in our planning and preparations for COP, and taking forward real action in the real economy. We can't deny that people are experiencing the impacts of climate change now. So we can't wait. I think there's been some great work done by Mock COP. Those, like, young people are amazing. Like, they have gone out of their way to deliver a very inclusive Mock COP, and it's great. So it can be done. It just takes time.
Absolutely. Tasneem, did you want to comment on that? I know you mentioned you had a few ideas, particularly, but maybe that's more around the processes themselves, or.
Well, look, I mean, I do think we are going to have to talk a little bit about, you know, the way you build inclusion. And I do want to say that in our engagements with the COP President's team, with Nikita and her team, they've been very proactive in their outreach to civil society and the other constituencies, and are trying their best. I think what we have been trying to say as rights-based constituencies who are accredited observers in the UNFCCC, representing millions of people across the world, that our voices can not be relegated to performative and symbolic acts of inclusion. That we have not only years of experience, of course, in these COPs, but in fact, many of the people we represent are actually at the front lines of the climate crisis. And so our inclusion, having our voices heard, not as, you know, just the watchdogs, but our constituencies have also developed solutions that we can share, etc. We need to have a meaningful place in this process and a meaningful seat at the table. And so the UNFCCC process, as I said, is not fit for purpose to deal with a climate emergency and to deal with the implementation that is so sorely needed of the Paris Agreement. So yes, there are areas that still need to be negotiated. That should go ahead. Parties and, you know, all of the observers, etc., who participate in negotiations and contribute should go ahead. But I think there is potentially an opportunity for the COP presidency to be creative. And we've seen this with, you know, when the Fiji COP presidency held their Talanoa dialogues, for example. It was their way of experimenting with different approaches. And potentially, I think, Nikita, the UK COP presidency might want to explore, and we could share some ideas potentially around this, could explore bifurcating the COP into the kind of negotiation process that is party driven, but maybe you would consider co-convening, and I mean genuinely co-convening, not setting up all these groups with a representative from the youth, and not only that, but a genuine partnership, equal partnership with the constituencies who represent millions, as I said, and co-convene a COP that looks at the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Not a talk shop, not getting into the nitty-gritty of texts, but let us sit around the table and actually share ideas about how we can improve the implementation, how we can get more ambitious action. All of us have a role to play. And so we might want to be creative within a very already established structure of the UNFCCC. I think a COP presidency can do something differently and can be creative. So that's the one suggestion I'd like to put on the table. And as you said, rightly so, the young people have demonstrated that where there's a will, you can do it. And so the mock COP, as an example, is a wonderful demonstration of how you can do things differently. So that's the one thing. But Meg, I want to come back to the other point about the outcome. This is sort of process related. The outcome, we have to ensure that there is, equity and fairness. And here again, we would want the UK to lead by example. And so I understand that the UK has put forward its Green Industrial Revolution plans. I also know that groups in the UK, civil society groups, have done work on what the UK's fair shares would be in terms of its global fair shares. And it would be useful for that engagement to happen in the country as well, because you cannot only be having a kind of inward-looking green industrial revolution. Your actions, what you do, has impact on the rest of the world. And again, it's important for me to remind everybody, when we're talking about, in your introduction, you spoke about how to ensure minority voices. I really want to be as frank as possible. Black, indigenous, people of color, peoples around the world are actually the majority in the world. And especially, of course, now talking about a person as a person from the global south, the kind of injustice that we are experiencing in the global south has to be addressed. It really has to be demonstrated by a COP, a president that wants to be providing leadership, that they are actually putting their actions to address that climate justice in developing countries as well. So again, emphasizing inclusive and fairness is both process and, very importantly, outcomes. And the last point I want to make about this is that, I recognize that there's this huge push to get as much support for a long-term goal of net zero. If we are really serious about what the science is telling us, we cannot only have a focus on net zero. We really have to look at what has to happen immediately and within the next 5 to 10 years, and even 10 years is too late. And if we don't look at the short-term action, then again, what you're basically saying to especially those millions of people around the world who are suffering the climate crisis right now, that we don't care. And I don't think that is fair or just. And so to pull this all together within that umbrella of being inclusive, being fair, and being just, we have to look at all of these pieces together.
Thanks so much, Tasneem. That's very powerful. I think I just want to take us back to something else that you were saying around sort of the impact of COVID on this really significant year of action, as you say, and what we need to sort of be doing right now. I'm both interested in Nikita, how you think it will impact the physical conference in terms of how we actually convene people and do physically bring people in, and maybe some of the new skills we've been learning with virtual convening will really help with the inclusive aspect of the conference itself. But also interested in what, and sort of bringing in what Tasneem was saying on sort of how this would impact communities and what they might be able to commit given the impacts that COVID has had on all sorts of different countries and the sort of inequalities that already exist there and how those are being compounded by this. So Nikita, I might just come to you if you want to talk on either of those aspects, and then come back to you, Tasneem.
Sure. Thank you both. So I think, inclusion isn't just an outcome, it's a process that leads to better outcomes. And that is what I am clear on. But those things take time and persistence. And I think that's the backdrop and the kind of foundation of how we're working. In terms of what this means for the actual COP itself, I don't think anybody knows what's happening in a couple of weeks' time, but, when we renegotiated the date for COP, developing countries and the African group were clear that they want negotiations to happen in person. It's really important, and it's important to them. So us as the presidency will respect that and, take that forward. And we're also clear that we want a strong civil society present at COP itself. Me and Tasneem had a call, maybe it was a few weeks ago, and she reminded us of just how important the observers were to just getting us to Paris in the first place. So there's that, I think. But as you said, we've learned a lot about how we can work now. COVID has impacted our lives in the way that it has. I do think that this virtual way of working has opened up participation and brings in more people to conversations that maybe wouldn't have been there before, because we would have had most of our meetings in London. From me and my team, we would have. So now we can make this as accessible as possible. At the same time, it would be wrong to assume that internet access is the same for everybody. It is not. And that is something that we are really aware of. Internet connections, access to computers and data and all that kind of stuff isn't equal for everybody. So we've been thinking about what can we do to ensure inclusion on the basis of removing barriers to facilitate that inclusion too. It's not enough for us to just say we want more global South voices here. I think what the difference is going out of our way to facilitate that. I cannot make any promises on exactly how we're doing that right now, but I want to work with civil society to find a way to make that happen. Else we are not going to get the outcomes that we need or we want at COP. And then the second part of your question, which I'm not going to lie, I've forgotten. What was it?
Just how you think COVID's impact on countries around the world will impact what they're bringing to the table and how much they can commit to the process.
So I've been really impressed with how much countries and parties have committed so far. We've seen, ambitious commitments from China and Korea and Japan, and that's great. We also are hosting a Climate Ambition Summit in December in partnership with the UN, France, Chile, and Italy to drive forward greater commitments from countries. And this isn't about, I think I've heard many a times from civil society that we're pledged out. It's no more pledges, it's commitments. So of course countries have a lot on their plate. They have I have a lot to deal with, and there's more to do. But we want to work with countries to support them in coming forward with ambitious commitments that make a difference in the real world, as well as in negotiations.
Great. Tasneem, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. No, look, Meg, I think that we have to be a bit honest about, if countries are saying, well, they can't do more. I really do want to talk, for example, about the financial contributions. In 2020, the countries that pledged their kind of pre-2020 commitments, whether it's emission reductions or their financing obligations, and there's already been backsliding on those commitments. So this is something that we have to be extremely vigilant about, because, you know, you can have these long-term targets and, you know, again, we're shifting the goalposts to another time, didn't fulfill our obligations up to now, and we'll just, there's the risk of backsliding, because up to now, we've not actually had evidence of people, of countries, sorry, fulfilling their obligations that they've already made. That's the one thing. The second thing I think we need to be very clear about, if countries are saying, well, you know, the COVID pandemic has caused us, which it has, you know, there's an economic crisis and we don't have freed up financing, then I'd like to know why countries can still bail out fossil fuel companies, as an example. Why are we still funding war and conflict? So I think it's important for all of us, as especially citizens, as civil society organizations, to be challenging our governments. Let's interrogate that. You don't have resources, but you're able to do, you know, these things that's actually, you know, perpetuating the crisis, the climate crisis and other crises. That's the one thing. The other thing that I think is going to be important is, again, the issue of ensuring that what we do now to recover will determine our ability to address these crises. And so this very immediate and urgent task on all our plates right now is to ensure that the governments actually spend their economic recovery stimulus packages on the right things, that it's just, it's fair, it's sustainable, it helps build resilience to multiple shocks in the future, and again, with a bias towards those who are most vulnerable to all of these crises. So I don't buy the kind of we don't have resources thing. I think that the way the money was spent, especially on bailing out the early bailouts, happened to be directed towards fossil fuel companies. That's not acceptable. Really, our resources must be put to ensure that we address the climate crisis, and to ensure we have climate justice, and to ensure that we actually have social justice as well. And that's between countries and within countries. And the UK itself has its own problems. And of course, it didn't help, let me be quite honest, with the recent announcement of UK aid cuts. Hasn't, you know, if the UK is wanting to provide leadership and be a leader, it also has to look at its own actions, as I said right at the start of that. And so we would be very worried with those kinds of signals, and hopefully you can recover and come out better and show and demonstrate that the UK actually will fulfill its obligations to developing countries, and will increase their actions and support towards developing countries as well.
Thanks, Tasneem. Gwen, I think you said you wanted to bring in some questions from the audience now. We've got a few.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, and thanks to the speakers so far, and thanks to everyone who submitted questions. The top most upvoted question so far is actually addressed to Alok Sharma. Obviously, he's not quite here yet, but hopefully we can discuss it in any case. So the question is, how do you justify the lack of women on the COP26 leadership team?
Yeah, Nikita, I might come to you on that, but I might also broaden it out a bit, given we have such a fabulous panel here today, to talk just generally about including women in the discussions as well, and how we can make sure, you know, particularly women from developing countries are heard in these discussions. Nikita, do you want to come in on that, and then we'll move to Tasneem perhaps?
I've had plenty of conversations about this, and I think the points that have been raised by civil society are important. And that's true, but we also do have great female leaders in our overseas networks as our ambassadors within the unit that are doing great work, and we want to do better. I would also say that it's everybody's job to ensure gender inclusion, just like it's everybody's job to help reduce ethnic disparities. We can't do it alone. So I think that's important. I think that we have a role in ensuring that all of the work and the preparations that we do, that we take even more care and consideration in who we work with, how we work with them, whose ideas we include and who we work with. Like there's more to this approach than just kind of, I don't know, than originally meets the eye. Like there's lots of processes and structures around that we need to work to. That's all I can probably say on the leadership point. But you will have Alok Sharma later.
Thanks, Nikita. Tasneem, did you want to come in on that?
You know, Nikita knows that the constituencies that they engage with us, the women and gender constituency, the environmental constituency, the indigenous peoples, youth, we wrote to the COP presidency about this particular matter. And so I do want to be very clear, you know, as I said earlier, I hope it's been clear enough. Who is in the room matters. Whose voices are being heard matters. And so, yeah, I suppose you have to ask Alok Sharma later on, but we did get a reply about our query around why there are no women. And apparently they've appointed one woman to the team. And again, you know, this is exactly the kind of thing, it's the spirit of what we're asking that needs to be thought through a little bit. You know, don't tell us in a very performative way, oh, but we've now put one woman into the team and that addresses your problem. That's not what we are saying as constituencies. We really have to be less curated and do these kinds of acts of symbolism. We want to be heard as well. And that's why I'm saying who's in the room matters. And that's why I'm saying, you know, right there, you have all these constituencies representing millions of people, workers, the indigenous people, farmers, the youth, women and gender are represented. That is the kind of voices that you need to value, respect, and include. And we have said we are willing partners. Reach out, which we've done, but take also into account what we are suggesting and proposing to make this less symbolic or, you know, performative, but really deeply meaningful. And there's a ready base for that. Again, I do want to say, when I said that the UNFCCC set up, its systems and structures are not really set up for inclusion and fairness, and we've had many engagements with the Secretariat about that. But if you consider the fact, as I said, that these constituencies are representing millions of people and who are representing the, you know, their constituencies are actually on the front line of the crisis, and we are just relegated to being these observers who will get potentially a few minutes to speak in an opening intervention or speak in a closing plenary when everybody, you know, all the parties have left the room. We speak in the very early hours of a morning because these COPs go on till late and nobody's listening. That's not inclusion and that's not fairness. And so, you know, we really have to open up a far more meaningful conversation about what we mean by inclusion. And I know Nikita and a team have been, you know, engaging with us, and I would really suggest even deeper engagements, because I think we started off on a basis where there's not, maybe there hasn't been a deep understanding of constituencies, how we work, you know, who we're representing, and the absolute value that we actually contribute towards well, addressing firstly the climate emergency, but also within this process, connecting the voices of people, the demands of people to that inside space that is really sorely needed. So I think there are still many challenges. Representativity is, of course, one of them. And, you know, the COP presidency has to walk the talk. And we are there as partners to support the work on the basis that our voices are truly heard and our suggestions and our ideas are appreciated and valued in a really meaningful way.
Thanks, Tasneem. It's very eloquent. Gwen, do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, sure. Another one which caught my eye was about the role of small island nations. So the question is, what has the role of the small island nations been in securing a 1.5 degree target? So I guess it's thinking back to the Paris Agreement and the really important role that they played in securing that as a deal.
Tasneem, did you want to come in on that one?
No, absolutely. I mean, the small island states, the least developing countries as well, played such an important role in securing the 1.5 degrees. And they did not do this alone. I mean, they were allies. So, you know, at that time, civil society organizations and all these other constituencies that I've spoken about, workers, women, the youth, etc., we all rallied behind the small island states, least developing countries push for 1.5. In fact, there have been civil society movements who have been pushing for 1.5 before Copenhagen. And when we look back, you know, to those times and in the time of reflection, you know, there have been many mistakes made. The warning signals were there way before Copenhagen. And we, you know, there were many, including my own, this network that I had at the time, did not really push as hard for 1.5, which we might, you know, from hindsight, we should have done. And now we're sitting and we get 1.5 in the Paris Agreement. And again, you know, 1.5 and having it in the Paris Agreement is not the end. Now it is to actually take the actions to ensure that we remain within 1.5, and we're not seeing that happen. You would have seen recently the reports that say our carbon emissions in the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased. So, you know, we seriously run the risk of not being able to stay below 1.5. We seriously run the risk. And that is why everybody's signaling that this is an emergency and we have to act in that fashion. And so, again, it is the outcomes that's as important. And it's meant to be ambitious action. And I can only keep on emphasizing that. And in that way, you can ensure climate justice, because it's through the ambition action on reducing emissions. And of course, developed and rich countries must lead and lead fast and deep. And it is on ensuring that there's enough financial support to developing countries, not only to also take their own mitigation actions and emission reduction actions, but also to ensure that they are protecting their citizens from climate impacts that are just becoming more and more devastating.
Thanks, Tasneem. Nikita, did you want to come in at all on anything that you're working on regarding that, or?
No, I think Tasneem covered the key points there.
Great. Gwen, did you want to the next question?
Sure, and I think this one will be directed at Nikita actually, so you can come in on this next one. Is what concrete steps is the COP26 unit taking to bring in different and new voices into its work over the next year?
So we are looking at a variety of ways to involve civil society, new voices in our work. So at the official level, as well as at the ministerial level. So some of you may have seen that the COP president set up a civil society and youth advisory group. And we want that group to challenge Alok Sharma and challenge us and hold us to account for our work on climate. So I'm really excited to work with that group to lead to kind of meaningful outcomes and change. we have a great Friends of COP group who cover lots of different areas of expertise and regions to help and challenge us to work to deliver a successful COP. At the official level, we have had lots of different discussions focused on kind of negotiations, as well as some of the key campaign areas about how do we work together to meet our commitments on climate finance? How do we work together to make progress on adaptation? How do we work together to kind of champion greater ambition? So there'll be lots of ways that we can work together on that. I think it is about what I'm really keen to do is to make sure that for the engagement to be meaningful, like it needs to be specific about kind of what does civil society care about. My virtual door is really open to having those discussions and continuing them as we run up to COP. There'll be different challenges along the way, and you know we won't get everything right with inclusion. That's not the nature of inclusion. Like structurally, we're not set up that way. But I really want to hear suggestions, what we could do better, what could we do differently, what should we stop doing. So yeah, like I'd be really happy to continue that conversation.
Thanks so much, Nikita. Tasneem, did you want to sort of comment on anything that you were hoping for from the COP team, or?
I think I've said, and again, you know, we've been engaging with the COP team, and we appreciate that. And I've said quite a bit on this in this conversation now. And happy to hear that the COP team and Nikita herself, your virtual door is open. I'm looking forward to being able to walk into your through your physical door. But yeah, we'll keep the engagement. The bottom line is, you know, and we've said this very frankly and very openly to the COP presidency team, that what we don't want is this kind of, you know, for sure, we don't want to see any greenwashing come out of the COP. Secondly, we don't want, as I said, these kind of symbolic actions that supposedly present an inclusive COP. We don't want that. And we'll call it out. I mean, you know, everybody knows, and the COP presidency, they know that we have a role to play, and we're going to call out things if we see it going off track. And that's what we do. And again, this is one other area of engagement that we would have to, you know, we're doing it with the Secretariat as well. Civil society and rights-based constituencies are very deeply committed to addressing the climate emergency and deeply committed to ensuring that we do get really ambitious outcomes that will address the climate crisis. And in so doing, as I said, we would be holding countries to account. But while we are at the COPs, you know, things go wrong. And we're going to put pressure on governments. And sometimes we do it in a manner that, you know, is our manner. We're going to do it through action. And so we also have to, part of the inclusion approach, an inclusive approach, is to have respect for that. You know, that we will take action where we need to, you know, protest, demonstrations, etc., and sometimes really creative actions. So we need that space. It was not dealt with very well in Madrid, at the COP in Madrid. And I'm not sure if you recall, but it was really not dealt with, you know, there was some kind of heavy-handedness, and we don't want to see that happening in Glasgow either. So it's going to be important for us, again, to open up the engagement, make sure that the COP presidency and the UNFCCC Secretariat understands the role that we play as civil society and other rights-based constituencies as well.
Thank you so much. I think, Gwen, we might have time for just one last one before I have a question to wrap up with as well. You want to?
Sure. So there was, if we could squeeze in one about a just transition, that would be great. There was one of the questions that came in was about sort of bailing out fossil fuel companies, but also acknowledging that those companies themselves need to change. and obviously workers are going to be part of the solutions as well. So if either of you had thought about just transition and how that sort of fits in with the justice narrative.
Great. Tasneem, do you want to come on that one first?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of work being done in this space. And in fact, lots of planning and processes that can be used as examples. Of course, they will differ from context to context, but essentially, you know, we recognize that in this kind of transition that we need to take, not just only in the energy space, but in well, economy-wide transitions, because the science basically says that to stay below 1.5, we're going to need radical transformations of our system, of our systems, energy, food, industrial systems, etc. Now, to have that kind of massive transformation, you would need to have an all of society approach. And you would, again, very similar to the conversation we're having in terms of, you know, the outcome and the process. If workers are not at the table making decisions and planning for that transition, if communities are not at the table, and especially impacted communities are not at the table. When I talk impacted communities, so for example, you know, many of these mines and coal-fired power stations are geographically located, so surrounding communities will also be impacted on. If they're not at the table, then you cannot talk about a just transition. Then it's not just at all. So it's very similar to what we've just been talking about, that the processes have to be inclusive as well as the outcomes. And, you know, and different countries have different approaches to the just transition. Germany's, you know, included, had an agreement with the workers in the energy sector, and they're paying a lot of, you know, they're funding the kind of impacts of shifting away from coal with the workers in that country. In others, there's sort of, you know, very bottom-up, inclusive processes around planning, whether it's sort of regional diversification, etc. So this is a space to watch. And again, you know, the Paris Agreement talks about the just transition, ensuring that we defend workers, and well, I think that we defend all of, you know, society in these big transitions. So yeah, we've done work in South Africa, as you when you introduced me, and it's been one in which we took an economy-wide approach, a society-wide approach, and was truly bottom-up, you know, included all these important social partners in the discussions about, you know, where do we want to transition to in the first place? What is that end state? And then looking backward, what would be the pathways that we need to take to get us to that kind of end state as well? And it's been a very exciting and challenging process, but really necessary. So it's hard. It's not, let me be clear, just transition is not going to be easy. There's a lot of vested interests, and there's going to be the need for compromise and mediation. And it's pretty much about power in the end. And so not just a technical exercise, it's really understanding that there's different power dynamics that would need to be dealt with, etc. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm not sure if the UK is doing just transition processes, but there's a lot out there already that can be learned from.
Nikita, do you want to comment on that really quickly, and then we'll just...
Sure. As Tasneem said, there's so much happening. I am not an expert on just transition, but we do have great colleagues in the unit that are working on a just transition campaign as part of the energy transition work to support countries to move away from the reliance on fossil fuels, and support those countries with the implications of that, and looking at what we can do and what we can do as a global community to support and acknowledge the impacts that this will have. But it's fundamentally important.
Thanks so much. That brings us nearly to time. Can I just ask both of you to wrap up with one sentence, which might be very difficult. What do you think is the one thing that needs to happen to make next year count for action on climate and nature in a sentence, if that's at all possible. Tasneem, I put you on the spot and go with you first.
Yeah, look, I think that the most important thing would be credibility. That whatever's being pledged or any announcements being made have to be backed up by real solid action. You know, the time for talk is past. So all announcements, all pledges, all commitments just have to be backed up by credible action.
Thanks so much. Nikita?
So mine would be keep challenging us, keep calling on us to do more, to go better. Like, you know, that's the way that we make progress. I think that was mentioned earlier on. We need to do more, and we will continue to do so. But please work with us on it, so we can make this situation that we're currently in make a better future of it, a fairer future, a more sustainable future for everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nikita, for joining us. So grateful for your time, given how busy you must be. And Tasneem, I could really just listen to you all day. So thank you so much for coming along. I'll hand back to Chris now.
Again, and thanks to Tasneem and Nikita for modelling the dialogue that we need to see between government and civil society, and those conversations around how we engage will no doubt keep being had over the coming weeks and months. And my takeaway was really around outcome there, just as Tasneem was saying, to make sure that we're focused on, you know, what COP really delivers in November for people across the world who are feeling the effects of the climate crisis right now. So I think that's my key takeaway, and also worth saying that, you know, and Nikita and myself have had this conversation as well over the last 6 months, that the environmental sector here in the UK has a very long way to go when it comes to, you know, really representing and being inclusive of communities most affected by the issues that we talk about. So just to note there that Green Alliance and the organisations that we work with have our own work to do on that. So that's the end of that session. Thanks for a great conversation. We're now we just got the blockbuster at 3:30. So that's Alok Sharma, the COP26 president, giving us his keynote reflections on and thoughts on his vision for COP26, followed by a quiz from Ariana Khan and Holly Gillibrand, two youth climate campaigners who'll be putting their questions to the Secretary of State. In the meantime, so you've got an hour and a half to do emails or just take a break. It is a Friday and we are almost at the end of what has been an incredibly long year. But we also have a networking platform, which sounds a bit scary, but it isn't. You can log on and you can meet really interesting people. I had a great session this morning where I met a bunch of people who I'd never spoken to before, who are active in this space, and was really inspired. I love my colleagues at Green Alliance, but it is nice to meet other people who are doing stuff. So I'll pop the link in the chat now, just gone in. Please do go there. I'll be there, as will lots of others, I hope. And we'll see you again at 3:30 to hear from the COP president. And that's all from me. Our executive director, Sean Spears, will chair the session later. So just a quick thank you for taking part in the day so far, and really hope you tune in to the session later. Thanks so much.